Hello guys, Art-Teeves here. In this video, I'll cover the process of 3D modeling this hat on hen's legs in 3ds Max 2024. Just as usual, I'll also show you the process of unwrapping this house in Rizom and texturing it in Substance Painter. Let's get started. This video is sped up for it not to last forever. If it's too fast, use YouTube's speed control or turn off my narration and follow the subtitles. My modeling process isn't a universal high-end workflow, I'm not even baking anything. But it's a handy approach for indie developers, and I'll share some tricks to speed up your process. The workflow you see here is based on some pre-planning. While I didn't use a reference image or a blockout, I designed the initial sphere with plenty of openings that could be filled in later. Its modular structure allows us to insert various models into existing orifices, enabling the creation of multiple versions of the same model. By the way, if you find my videos helpful, hit subscribe for more stylized 3D tips. For my workflow, I am using a script called Loop Regularizer, a precision tool that algorithmically adjusts edge loop geometry to transform regular polygons into mathematically perfect circles. It analyzes vertex distribution and applies curvature correction while maintaining quad topology integrity, which is especially essential when working with subdivision-ready models. Obviously, Loop Regularizer isn't much help for spherifying an opening on a curved surface. We won't subdivide this hat, but we'll definitely regularize a lot, which will be really helpful. If you want to project details onto a sphere, you can use Rapid Tools, though I didn't rely on it for this particular workflow. You can see how it works in my previous video, where I cover the process of modeling a simple stylized spaceship. Even though I'm improvising, I'm not working completely blind. I pre-plan the locations of all openings and design rear openings in pairs, linking them to pipes and boilers while ensuring they align along the same parallel lines. It's one of those small but crucial planning decisions that pays off massively in later stages of modeling. First, I create a sphere and refine its shape using the FFD modifier. For more complex objects, the best approach is to combine polygon modeling with the NURMS workflow. For creating the orifice cutouts, I use Propeller with spherical cutters. Just ensure your base sphere has sufficient geometry density before starting. The automated retopology handles the edge flow, so we don't need to worry about the polycount on our Boolean cutters or their edge distribution. Additionally, ensure your cutouts maintain proper spacing and scale. Avoid placing holes too close to each other or making them excessively small. For detailed perforations with low edge counts, consider adding them manually in the later stage instead of using Boolean operations. After completing the Autoretopo, take time to experiment with different target polycount settings. Pay close attention to how it handles small openings. You'll want to stop reducing the polycount once the system begins collapsing smaller holes. With the openings established, I begin optimizing the topology by removing unnecessary edges and vertices. The next critical step involves framing each porthole with a clean ring of quadrilateral polygons. This isn't merely cosmetic. Maintaining proper four-sided geometry is vital for preventing shading artifacts and ensuring clean subdivision results later. While triangles might offer a quick solution, they often lead to visible distortions during deformation or subdivision. Investing time in proper edge flow now saves significant troubleshooting effort downstream. That said, I'll still strategically use triangles in non-critical areas. I've also intentionally preserved some shading anomalies. These often result during texturing. Interestingly, the irregular surface qualities can actually enhance the worn industrial look, mimicking the uneven metal of aged machinery. A good rule of thumb for the initial sphere is as follows. For medium-sized details, begin with at least 32 to 48 segments. For finer work, 64 plus segments may be necessary. This approach guarantees sufficient vertex density to preserve smooth curvature while accommodating clean edge loops around our cutouts. Remember, reducing geometry later is always simpler than fixing an undersampled mesh. As emphasized earlier, maintaining pristine topology around openings is critical. Follow the golden rule. frame every hole with a complete loop of well-proportioned boards. To achieve this, strategically optimize your edge flow. Eliminate redundant edges while adding strategic support loops using the Insert Edge tool. The technique is quite simple. When inserting new edges in 3ds Max, hold Shift to make the tool respect your existing polygon flow. This modifier key helps maintain the logical structure of your mesh while giving you precise control over edge placement. Next, I thoroughly clean the resulting sphere, systematically removing all trees and angons while eliminating any shading artifacts. I aggressively trim down the polycount, paying special attention to ensure openings maintain efficient edge counts that won't unnecessarily inflate the geometry later. Admittedly, this meticulous cleanup process is a tedious work, which explains why I have accelerated this section in the video. Hole modeling, from the base sphere to marmoset render, took me something between 9 to 10 hours. As mentioned before, the key challenge with these models lies in balancing edge density, maintaining enough subdivisions for clean shading while avoiding unnecessary geometry that inflates the poly count. Even after optimization, this model still has some obvious areas for improvement. A targeted pass of manual retopology could refine it further. Our completed hub mesh comes in approximately 11k polygons with nearly double that in triangles, well within the target range for an indie game hero asset. That said, there's still room for optimization, since we are dealing with limited mechanical functions. There is no reason to allocate precious polygons to static details that won't contribute to gameplay or visual impact. Let's examine some specific details. The main window section uses a 24-sided profile, which borders on excessive. For other elements, the porthole and the event employ 16 and 17 sides respectively. Both the pipe and tree feature 16 sides each, while the main opening stretches to a substantial 38 sides. The hatch settles at 18 sides, contrasting with the more economical rear pipe attachments, 14 and 8 sides on the left, 12 and 9 on the right. The improvised fence wings push to 20 sides each, clearly overkill, while the legs maintain a reasonable 16-sided profile. For a non-hero asset, we could reduce the side counts significantly. Hands and wings could easily work with just 12 sides, and the same optimization could apply to most roof openings, excluding of course the massive central opening. Every opening requires a supporting edge loop of clean, properly proportioned quads. The standard applies throughout the entire mesh. The closer your polygons maintain this ideal square shape, the better your results. This becomes absolutely critical for animated models, where irregular polygons will inevitably cause deformation issues and visual artifacts during movement. For spherical vertex adjustments, I use a combination of edge constraints with strategic switching between world and local coordinate systems. When centering objects in openings, follow this workflow. First, create a supporting edge ring by shift-scaling edges inward, then collapse them to a central vertex. The Select and Place tool handles final positioning, but its reliability depends entirely on proper pivot preparation. Always set up your pivots methodically, save your file, reset transforms via Xform, collapse your modifier stack, and perform manual alignment before placement. This disciplined approach maintains precision while preserving clean topology. Sometimes the Select and Place tool doesn't quite get the angle right. That's when I switch to local coordinates and manually rotate the element. Perfect alignment isn't always necessary. In fact, a bit of controlled deformation can actually enhance the stylized look we are after. For insertable models, I follow this workflow. First model them as separate objects, carefully matching their edge count to the surrounding geometry. Then position them into existing openings, remove their outer edge loops and bridge the geometry to connect with their corresponding orifices. As mentioned previously, you can project numerous surface details onto your sphere using the Rapid Tools add-on. For a comprehensive guide on this technique, refer to my earlier video demonstrating the workflow through a simple stylized spaceship model. Here's the way to simplify round openings. First, pick every other edge with dot loop, works even with odd numbers like 19 sides. Second, collapse these edges to cut the count in half. Third, use loop regularizer to clean up the circle. I'm adding chamfers to most pipe intersections, partly because creating convincing texturing for these areas would require advanced painting skills I haven't yet developed. While you could bake those details, hand painting achieves far better results for the stylized aesthetic I'm targeting. Naturally, a realistic modeling approach would require entirely different techniques. My workflow centers on modeling the entire hut as a unified object. Since the hands and legs use primarily rubber textures, we can articulate them freely through a bond system. That said, many secondary elements work better as separate objects, like the vent's propeller and fan's planks, which I've kept detached from the main model. This modular approach allows for flexible additions later, whether it's foliage for the tree or organic growth like mushrooms emerging from damaged surfaces. Personally, I prefer modeling rigid structures as single meshes when possible. Each method has its trade-offs depending on your project needs. Like I said before, good planning makes topology much easier. If you build all your openings into the base shape from the start, you can just plug in models later without any headaches. But trying to add new holes to an almost finished model, that's when things get frustrating, especially when your new opening needs a different number of sides than what's already there. While automated retopology works for simple objects, complex shapes need either careful planning or manual cleanup. Here's a useful trick. For certain details, you can add them as separate intersecting pieces instead of merging them. Just ensure they, first, overlap cleanly, and second, don't share any vertices or planes with the rest of your model. Otherwise, you'll run into Z-fighting issues. Z-fighting happens when two surfaces occupy the exact same space in a 3D scene. Since the graphics card can't decide which one to show, they flicker as they fight to appear on top. For flat areas with too many polygons, using some triangles can save Polycount. Just know, this makes loads harder later. The wings and legs were created as splines using the Loft tool. I gave them 20 and 16 sides, specifically to match the corresponding openings in the hut's base. Now 16 sides might seem excessive. You could easily get by with just 12 in many cases. But if we are making a hero asset that will be prominently visible during gameplay, the extra detail is justified. The same goes for the UV resolution. When players will be seeing this house up close, the additional texture detail matters. Once you've perfected one leg or wing, first, align its pivot to the house's main pivot. Second, use the symmetry tool to copy your model onto the other side. And third, bridge the newly created model to the rest of the house. Obviously, it's a good idea to memorize the initial position of the house's pivot point and never move it later on. The sphere will get deformed and its center will tend to go elsewhere, creating imperfections. Those imperfections aren't bad if you ask me, since we don't want our model to be symmetrical. Otherwise, we would rely on symmetry tool from the very beginning. When modeling stylized cartoony props, remember, less is more. Skip tiny intricate details and go big. Thick exaggerated shapes with almost comical proportions sell the style far better. Think bold silhouettes and chunky forms that read clearly from any angle. After completing the model, I finalize the smoothing groups and center it to the word origin 000 scene coordinates. Then I perform a thorough quality check, first hunting down any angons, polygons with more than 4 edges, then using the 3ds Max's X-View tool to identify problematic geometry, like overlapping or isolated vertices and open edges. I'll stop narrating for now and resume it in the UV unwrapping section. The table of contents for this video is available both in the description and in the comment section below. And I'm back. The complete model utilizes a single 4K resolution UV map with a padding of 16, mainly for demo purposes. We could use a 2K map with the same padding, or stick to a high-res 4K map with a padding of 32. All seams are strategically placed along hard edges, and UV islands are straightened in Rizom UV to minimize texture distortion. The layout maintains strict separation with no overlapping UVs. I am using a beginner-friendly non-overlapping approach for this model, which wastes a ton of our UV space. For example, rubber elements of each leg could have shared UVs. Same goes for many decorative elements, including those Slavic wooden things that decorate our Hobbit-inspired door frame. Also, 4K is obviously excessive for an object that is technically a non-hero prop. Strategic UV seam placement is key. We can either position them along accessible edges for easy Substance Painter repairs with the clone stamp tool, or hide them in less visible areas. As an added solution, switching to triplanar projection in Substance Painter typically makes most seams disappear completely. Pay special attention to straightening UV chucks containing bendable hoses. This will be essential for properly adding consistent details along their lengths and texturing. This particular model has many cones that shall not be straightened for obvious reasons. After normalizing UVs in 3ds Max, I perform manual scaling to allocate more texture space to visually prominent elements. Conversely, I reduce the size of UV chucks that will be obscured or less visible during typical use. When adjusting UV island sizes, make sure to maintain relative proportions within the same object. It's generally good practice to keep UV size variations within 20% of neighboring elements. Always scale UV islands uniformly per element. Any uneven scaling will create visible seams that Substance Painter can't fix, no matter what tricks you try. Before you send your model to different software, remember to reset its rotation angles, pivot points, scale, and X-form. Finally, I resize some UV chucks I want to resize and repack the model in Rizom. Then I return to 3ds Max and use its X-View tool to scan my model for some overlapping UV chucks. I'll stop narrating for now and resume it in the texturing section. My baking process is fairly consistent. I typically set the maximum ray count across all tabs, though it doesn't make a significant difference since we are bypassing the traditional high-to-low poly baking workflow. The key steps are disabling the ID section and setting subsampling to 16. As I've already mentioned, we are baking this model at 4K resolution with 16 pixel padding, primarily for demo purposes, since it's not a hero asset, a 2K map with the same padding would actually be a more efficient choice. I love combining exaggerated stylized forms with semi-realistic textures. It creates that charming dollhouse miniature aesthetic I'm so fond of. This approach lets me maintain playful proportions while still grounding the design with believable wear, materials and depth. The contrast between the two styles gives our model a unique handcrafted feel. First things first, I add a preset steel stained smart material. It will serve as a background for the custom smart material we create. I alter its settings slightly. First we want to change the projection method for our smart material to triplanar, so that most UV seams disappear entirely and we don't have to cover them manually. Next I make subtle adjustments to the base metal properties. First, reducing the luminosity slightly to turn down excessive brightness, and second, increasing roughness just enough to eliminate unnatural glossiness. These tweaks help achieve a more balanced material that fits our stylized aesthetic without looking artificially shiny. Finally, I go to the dirt settings and play with the dirt's grunge scale. This way we'll get a lot more detail out of it. With the steel base prepared, I now add a metal rust layer, found in your default materials panel. Key adjustments. First, disable height and normal channels to prevent surface distortion. Second, set projection to triplanar for seamless application. And third, optionally experiment with styling values to control rust density. I mask the rust folder and apply a Gun Edges preset smart mask to it. We can play with its global balance setting and also invert the grunge so the rust is only visible at edges. If we want to add some additional masks to this layer, we can do it by adding a fill layer and filling our mask with a different grunge, say grunge scratches rough, which has a modified tiling. To make masks work together, we switch the second mask's blending mode to subtract for different layer types. Next we apply the color layer. For this I'm using an existing smart material called Steel Painted Stained. Its color can be adjusted at any time, either by selecting from the color palette or by blending multiple colors as they are applied across the scene. Next I apply a black mask to my paint layer, and then use a Rust Smart Mask to selectively reveal texture. Next I create an anchor point, a reference we can use later to control height adjustments. Here's how it works. First, create a height data fill layer, disabling all tabs except height. Second, slightly increase the height value. And third, add a fill layer and populate it with the anchor point I prepared earlier. Now adjusting the height of this layer will modify the elevation of the paint layer, making it protrude above both the rust layer and the exposed metal beneath. Next we can enhance this layer by adding both a high pass and a levels filters. These adjustments will give us precise control over the transition edge between the paint and rust layers. Avoid perfecting colors at this stage. Final color adjustments will be easier once all other texturing and detailing are complete. Additionally, periodically change your environment settings and rotate the lighting to evaluate how your model responds under different conditions. This practice ensures consistent material behavior and highlights any areas needing refinement. Mind that I'm using a couple of materials for this model that aren't built in for a typical substance painter. One is the moss material originally available at the cc0textures.com website, and the other one is tree bark, which was released in one of the Substance Painter's small stylized packs. Also I make a few adjustments to my workflow here. This time I rely heavily on blur slope filter that gives some of your grunges a somewhat hand-painted stylized look. I also create a different version of my main paint layer and play with some preset smart masks till I get a result that satisfies me. Paint Old Smart Mask is really nice to add some details. There are no universal tips here, since everything depends on your model and the amount and type of edges it has. I duplicate the entire material folder, preserving all its layers and settings to create a second instance. Then I adjust the base color. This gives me two distinct material variations to work with. Next I fill pipes and frames and other key elements with a third variation of my base material. The color at this stage isn't necessarily final. It's often better to fine-tune hues later, once the whole color blockout is complete. Since all major layers remain editable, adjustments can be made non-destructively even after the initial pass. Balancing dull colors is inherently easier than managing bright ones, so this approach can be especially helpful if you are still developing your palette selection skills. While detailing, it's important to avoid excessive material variations. Too many differences can make a model look unintentionally eclectic. For the rubber joints, I employ a technique consistent with my recent demonstrations. The base material uses the Rubber Dry Smart Material preset with minor color modifications. A secondary variant is created by reducing the height values, then masked with a black layer. A fill layer incorporating the stripes grunge pattern is applied to introduce surface variation while maintaining material cohesion. The stripes grunge pattern features a default 45-degree angle orientation. To maintain visual consistency, I rotate the layer to 45 degrees and adjust the tiling parameters to achieve appropriately scaled stripes. Note that the optimal rotation value depends entirely on your UV layout. If your UV chucks are aligned horizontally, a 135-degree rotation may be necessary instead. Successful stripe application requires properly straightened UV chucks. Any curvature in the UV shell will create visible seams that can't be effectively masked, resulting in undesirable visual artifacts. This fundamental constraint makes proper UV preparation essential before applying directional patterns. The portholes and other glass elements rely on plastic dusty smart material preset combined with the base material of glass visor. Additionally, to prevent interference from underlying metal layers, I select the material folder and set its height channel blending mode to replace. This ensures the plastic retains its own height data without being affected by the textures beneath it. Welded seams are created by leveraging the Paint Along Path tool with Substance Painter's default brush. For the best results, experiment with your weld's seam's material color and roughness settings to fine-tune the appearance. To hide any remaining visible UV seams, create a new paint layer, set all of its blending options to pass through, and use the Clone Stamp tool, adjusting the brush flow as needed for a natural result. And this is it. Thanks for watching, guys. If my videos are of use to you, be my guest and subscribe to my channel for more stylized content. And most importantly, have a great day.